Unfortunately, the most research many property investors do involves finding a property they fall in love with and then clicking on a few websites to confirm the decision they've already made. On the other hand, sophisticated investors take a strategic approach to research that makes their investment results much more consistent and reproducible, and it stops emotions creeping in. So how can you learn to research like a pro? Firstly, it's important to always start with the macro, the big picture, and then drill down to the property, the micro factors. That's because your property's location will do 80% of the heavy lifting, and then choosing the right property in that location will account for about 20% of its performance. When I changed my investment research criteria from looking at what happened in the past to forecasting what's likely to occur in the future, I improved the performance of my investment selections and those of my clients considerably. Rather than doing the type of research most people do, looking at how locations performed in the past, I look at factors that are going to drive performance in the future, and these include demographic and population growth, economic and employment growth, which leads to wages growth and the ability to afford properties, infrastructure growth, and supply and demand. I also look for multiple growth drivers because we've all recently seen the results of those who invested in areas which had a single growth or economic driver, like the mining towns. Similarly, I see people who say, oh look, there's going to be a big hospital built in that area and that's going to make things boom. No, that's still just a single growth driver. The lesson I'm trying to get across is there need to be multiple growth drivers to underpin your property's long-term performance. This means if one or two falter for a while, there's going to be other factors supporting it. And it's all happening in our big capital cities now and in the foreseeable future, because most economic growth, most jobs growth, most wages growth is happening in the capital cities, and interestingly 2/3 of it is happening in Melbourne and Sydney. However, just because you found an area that's likely to grow well doesn't mean every property in that location is going to be investment grade. For example, a property must appeal to a large local demographic. An apartment would be a good investment in the inner or middle ring suburbs, but a family home is more likely to perform well in the outer suburbs where an apartment would be out of place. To ensure I always select properties that will outperform the market in general, I follow two specific strategies: my top-down approach and my six-stranded strategic approach. So we drill down. With the top-down approach, I start looking at how the macroeconomic environment, the big picture of Australia and its economy, is performing. Then I look at the right state in which to invest, one that will outperform the market averages because of its economic growth and population growth. And as I said, I only invest in the capital cities, not in regional Australia, because that's where the bulk of the jobs are going to be created and where most people are going to want to live. Then within that state, I look for the right group of suburbs, one that have had a long history of outperforming the averages in the past. You see, I've found some suburbs outperform by 50 to 100% over a 10-year period, because it's all about demographics. So I look for suburbs where people are more likely to be owner-occupiers and have higher, more affluent wages, because these are the areas where there's also likely to be more wages growth. People are going to have higher disposable incomes. In general, they're the more affluent inner and middle ring suburbs of our big capital cities. So I check the census statistics to see where suburbs have more wages growth than average. Then I look for the right location within that suburb. As you know yourself, some livable streets will outperform others, just like in your suburb. Then within that location, I look for the right property using my six-stranded strategic approach. And finally, I only buy at the right price. But I'm not suggesting you buy cheap property. There's always going to be cheap properties, especially in secondary locations. I mean, the right property at a good price. Then, as I said, I use my six-stranded approach once I've researched the right suburb. I only buy a property that appeals to owner-occupiers. Not that I plan to sell, but owner-occupiers are going to buy similar properties, pushing up local real estate values. This is particularly important in the current market as the percentage of investors is likely to diminish. Then I only buy a property below its intrinsic value, and that's why I avoid paying a premium for new and off-the-plan properties. I buy properties with a high land to asset ratio. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you've got to have a large plot of land. Apartments with a high attributable land value underneath them work well. I buy in areas with a long, strong history of capital growth because of the demographics that are there. As I said, I'm looking for areas where wages growth in particular is going to outperform the averages. And then I buy a property with a twist, something with a bit unique, special, different, scarce about the property. And finally, I only buy a property where I can manufacture capital growth manufacture equity through renovations, redevelopment, rather than waiting for the market to do the heavy lifting. So while most investors read a book or two and do a little bit of research and then buy a property, strategic investors have a much smarter approach. They use a system that stood the test of time. By following my approach, I minimise my risks and maximise my upside. Each strand represents a way of making money from property, and combining them all puts the odds in my favour. If one strand lets me down, others are going to support my property's performance, making sure my investments always outperform the averages. If you'd similarly like to make sure that you're only buying investment grade properties, or if you want to just assess how your current property portfolio is working, why not have a chat with the team at Metropole? We have no properties for sale, but access to every property on the market. But first we do some strategic work on you, your portfolio, and decide where you want to head. Give us a call at metropole.com.au.